right. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everybody, and welcome to this Project RELO Task Force Tribute discussion. We got a really fascinating story here because it's a collection of stories. It's actually a number of military members who never met each other before, had this lightning strike thing happen where they all converged on the same event at the same time. And this isn't like some little event. This wasn't like bumping into the Starbucks. It was something much, much more serious than that. And we want to talk about that and explore it and talk about why why it's definitively a good idea for wherever possible, us to collect our veteran stories, because they so often connect to other veteran stories. And you're going to see that firsthand right here, right now, maybe not in real time as we discovered it, but still in a very fascinating way. We hope. Joining us here, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm going just in the order of my Hollywood squares. We got Eric Ward. Eric, welcome. 18 Delta Green Beret. Eric, give us 2 seconds about you. What's your background here?
Awesome. Thanks, Christian. So the super short version is you joined the military in 2003. You stayed in service for about 8 years, spent the first couple as an engineer and a couple of years of school, and the last 4 as a Green Beret. Had a great time with the team and got out in 2010 to pursue new exciting opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you. And, it's just post Veterans Day. And as much as I hate to say this, because I hate hearing it, I think we could say it all amongst ourselves. Thank you for your service. Thank you all for your service to this country. And on that note of thanking for service, let me go to Buff Burkell. Buff is a former Air Force colonel, and as you can see, has incredibly good taste by wearing that Block M on her hat. Go blue, Buff. Real quick, a little bit more on you, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. To say hell yes to get started, but I've known Christian since I was an ROTC cadet at Michigan. I actually received his family's scholarship in honor of his brother. My first year in Air Force ROTC, when I switched over from being an orthodontist to, hey, let me try this ROTC thing. And fast forward, graduated in 91, got commissioned. 27 and a half years later, I retired, which is coming up on just about 4 years of retirement. I was a navigator in C-141s and C-130s. I was a C-130 squadron commander and a whole raft of other assignments all over the world, to include the one as an Afghan air advisor that we'll talk a little bit about here later on. I settled in the St. Louis area, and I do inspirational motivational speaking. And I also am the captain of one of our St. Louis Blues Warrior hockey teams. It's a veterans hockey team, and there are teams scattered all over the country. And I happen to be on the St. Louis version of the team. So it's been a great experience getting out. And it's a lot like our fellowship in our service that we did to heal through hockey. And it's a great experience.
Heal through hockey and just healing by being with people that kind of understand some of the same trials and tribulations, some of which we'll explore here momentarily. Buff, thank you and welcome. And last and certainly not least is this gentleman here with this very fine haircut. This is Clayton Reif. He is a former Army captain and infantry as well. I think he was an infantry company commander when he got out. Clayton, correct me if I'm wrong, and add a little color if you would, please.
No, thanks, Christian. I appreciate that. You are correct. And similar to Eric, I had about 7 years of active duty service. And where our story picks up is about 2015. And at that time, as you mentioned, I was the 101st Pathfinder commander. Joined the Pathfinders, which was a expeditionary unit. And we'll go into a bit detail on that here shortly as we explore the story. Expeditionary of downed aircraft and personnel recovery was our primary focus. So I'll stop there, we'll pause, and I'll allow you to take it from there.
All right, excellent, Clayton. Thank you and welcome everybody. So let me kind of set up this story because it's fascinating. I don't think it's just fascinating to me. I hope it's not fascinating to just me, but here it goes. So if you've been following us at all, you know something about Project RELO. It's a 501c3, and what we do is we teach leadership to top corporate executives. And how we do that is through our partnerships with the Department of Defense and the United States Army. We use military bases and we conduct military exercises with these corporate executives. And our instructors are, well, like you can see here, these wonderful men and women that are on the screen here, and they impart all the leadership training and skills that they developed while in service to our country. It is an incredibly experiential leadership event, changes lives, both of the instructors and of course of the executive participants that really benefit from learning more about like the real quality, the real character, and the important soft skills that our veterans have. So that's the backdrop. And the story starts now here, where I'm driving up to Northern Michigan, where we're going to conduct one of these exercises. Project RELO missions is what we call them, on Camp Grayling. And on my way up there, I pick up the phone and I'm talking to Buff. And I'm just checking in with Buff, and Buff is telling me the story about how she's doing, because Buff, and you'll hear more, was involved in a very bad, and there's no other word for it. There was a very bad accident. I won't get into the details too much. That we'll expand on, but it was a nice contact with Buff. I've known her, as she said, since she received my brother's scholarship award at the University of Michigan. He was killed while in service to our country, and there's a leadership award that's given to the top cadets and midshipmen and women graduating from the University of Michigan. And Buff was exceptional, still is absolutely exceptional, won that award. Okay. Now, fast forward, I had this conversation on the way to Northern Michigan. 2 days later, we're sitting around with our two veterans instructors. In this case, it's Eric and Clayton. And we're doing an after action with all the executives. And then this is where this lightning strike happens, because Clayton didn't know Eric. Eric didn't know Clayton. Neither one of them knew Buff. All right. And it starts like this, and I'll turn it over to the team here in a second. Eric is talking about how he has benefited from the service and the innovations that he had to make while in the military, and how that mindset's translated so well to his civilian and corporate career. And he's doing exceptional, by the way, which is just a nice little footnote. And he talks about this thing that he invented. It's a 3-person litter made out of a parachute. Right? Folds up, it's small, it's convenient, it's way better than what the alternatives were at the time. And, he's talking about that. And then there's this pivot. And I start talking about this really wonderful Air Force colonel who I was talking to on the way up, remember Buff. And that's where this lightning strike happens. What happens is I'm talking about Buff and I'm explaining the situation. The guy on the screen, Clayton, Army captain, commanding officer of a pathfinding company, sits forward in his chair and says, "You mean she's alive? She's alive? I was there when her helicopter went down." And then looks over at Eric and says, "Eric, that thing you created, we had those. My team members had those things. And that's some of the tools that we used to evacuate the wounded from the helicopter that crashed." And so, folks, the reason why I'm telling the story, and I want to start with Buff to explain what happened to her, and then talk about how these lives intersected. But at that moment, we realized that there are these stories coming together, and they're powerful, they're emotive, and they mean something to us. And we'll close on the meaning of these stories coming together. So enough of me talking. That's way more of a monologue than I ever usually do. I want to turn it over to Buff. Buff, could you give us what happened that day, and explain it in some detail, and make sure we understand the seriousness of it. And then I want to introduce where the other stories collide. Is that all right?
Yeah, I need to start by saying I absolutely don't remember what happened. There's a period of time, and I can tell you that where I remember, what I don't remember, but between the British report investigating the crash and the people I've gotten to meet that are part of the story, I can tell you the story, which is what I literally do now for a living, is share the story to remind us of exactly some of what we're doing here today. And I can do that because I've met those people and I've read the report, but I don't have a recollection of it, and I probably never will, according to the VA traumatic brain injury folks. I just simply didn't make that memory that day. And so back in October of 2015, I was working on a project to update the Afghan Air Force's Manning document, and we needed to go to the Afghan Air Force or Afghan Ministry of Defense to support the Afghans briefing that to our Combined Security Transition Command Afghanistan, to say, here's the updates we need to make to the Afghan Air Force to incorporate some new weapon systems that we were bringing online, to create units to fly those weapon systems and that sort of thing. And that task of coordinating with the Afghan Air Force to update that document fell to my folks and I. And that necessitated a trip from the forward operating base that we were at to the NATO headquarters to spend the night and then get up that next morning to travel over to the Afghan Ministry of Defense on foot. And of course, in Afghanistan at that time and still now, and in Kabul, excuse me, I'm getting over the back end of a cough, so I may cough a little bit, but that's why I have the coffee here to help out. We needed to go over to NATO because we couldn't just drive that Monday morning. And this was, we traveled on the 11th of October, which was a Sunday. And living on that fob as anybody who's been deployed, I was looking forward to going to the NATO headquarters because I could eat some different food at the U.S. Embassy Chow Hall. I could work out at the NATO gym where I didn't have to wear the Air Force fitness gear, which I found I didn't care for it. It was loud, and I like wearing like Michigan stuff when I'm working out. I don't want to wear Air Force issued PT gear. So there's some things I was looking forward to kind of break the monotony. So myself and three of my folks planned our travel for Sunday afternoon. Our master sergeant put it together, and he had been in country about a week. He had taken over from one of our other master sergeants. It was him, my major that was my deputy in the personnel side of the house, which they had a NAV running training, coordinating, training, advising with the Afghans, and then personnel, which is fascinating. But hey, you know, I'm a colonel, so I'm supposed to be a generalist, and we were working with them. So we did all of that coordination, got everything ready, and we went to travel from Kabul International Airport to the NATO headquarters. And you got to do that with a helicopter because traveling on the ground is not safe over there. And so that was all set up. And there's a series of different types of helicopters that provide that transportation to NATO members all over Kabul and some other places in and near the Kabul area. And so it's pretty routine. It's about a 5-minute flight. And so we got ready to do that Sunday afternoon. And there was actually an exercise at Kabul International Airport. So we were running about 15 minutes late. And it was a 2-ship of British Puma Mark II helicopters that landed for us to get on. And so we just got on the helicopters, really didn't pay attention to where we were sitting. And that day, if you sat on the right-hand side of the helicopter, you were not going to live through what happened. If you sat on the left side, you would live, but you would be injured. And so we just sat down. There was the 3 of us, and there were 3 other NATO passengers. There was 8 seats in the back, and then there's 3 crew members on that British crew. And we took off, and we were number 2 of 2, and we went over. And that flight, I remember that, like I said, 5 minutes, traveling to maintain, you know, security and not have the risk on the ground. As we came into landed at the NATO headquarters, soccer field, 10,000 plus landings a year while we were there on average. Everybody lands at that soccer field. If you're going to NATO and you're flying in, you're going to land at that soccer field. If you're a civilian contractor or you're the 4-star general who runs NATO, you're going to land that way. We came into the soccer field, and again, we were a scheduled arrival. We were about 15 minutes late. As we came into land in that 2-ship formation, yes, I'm a nav with my little hands in formation flying. We came in, and there were people on that field playing soccer. So we couldn't land. So the lead helicopter said, hey, we need to try this again. So I remember that descent. I remember the T-wall, the construction, you know, the concrete barrier T-walls around that soccer field. And we didn't finish that landing. I remember what's going on. And that's the last coherent thought I had. There was a lot of kind of generalized, sort of like almost like a dreamlike state of confusion that ensues after that. And during that time period, what happens is we come off of that landing zone, go back around. And as we're doing that, our pilots are talking about some ground reference points like the Palace, this and that, and they lose sight of our lead helicopter. That contributes to the crash. It's not the causal factor, according to the British report and what they found. They realize they've lost sight of our lead, so they make a right-hand turn to regain visual on them. And in doing that, they don't have the situational awareness that there's basically a surveillance blimp kind of above the NATO camp that's tethered to the ground by a cable. They lose situational awareness of where they are relative to that blimp. And so we strike the tether of that blimp. That contributes. What causes our helicopter to crash is the way that tether damages the helicopter. It's about 24 seconds into this that we then lose the tail rotor drive shaft. That stops operating. So now this helicopter is not going to work anymore. And these guys are fighting to maintain control. And somehow they managed to crash land this helicopter into the NATO compound. What you think about, we were not in, we took off and went back around. So we're traveling over Kabul, which is not secure area. They somehow managed to crash land that helicopter into the NATO compound right near the German national security element. And we impacted the ground, kind of cocked nose up to the right, 16 to 32 G's of force, 4,000 feet per minute as we ran to the ground, because it was not a flyable aircraft anymore. They did shut the engines off. We didn't crash into a building, we crashed into a street. There was one Turkish colonel on the ground who was injured by the crash, which is truly amazing if you think about what could have happened with all those people that are working NATO issues at the NATO headquarters if we had gone into a building or a busy area, or the chow hall or the gym, which was right down the boulevard from where we did crash. So as we hit the ground, that results in the death of the 5 people on the right-hand side. The pilot, the door gunner, the French contractor, my major, and my master sergeant are killed from that crash. The 4 of us on the left-hand side survived in I call it various stages of disrepair. The pilot up front, really seriously injured. When the Brits went to debrief him, they debriefed his wife because he really couldn't take that in. I'm not sure what his condition is now. I am in connection with one of the wife of one of the crew members that did not survive the crash. But that guy was very seriously injured. Roy, my contractor, who is to my right, closest to the front of the cockpit, he was not seriously injured. He had his arm out of the aircraft, but he had been in Afghanistan a few years prior when an Afghan colonel had gone into the Afghan Air Force headquarters building and shot and killed 9 of our Air Force air advisors. And he was there in the building that day, had to jump out of a 2nd floor window. So if you think about the accumulation of these events, you can imagine what must have been going through his heart and mind and soul as he's in this helicopter that crashes into the ground. I broke my neck. I have the same injury as Christopher Reeve. I shouldn't be here, but through the grace of God and a lot of wonderful people that ran towards the helicopter that day, I'm here. I'm playing hockey. I retired from the Air Force on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro 4 years ago, but I don't remember any of that. I apparently am yelling, "Get me out of here." And then to my left, the 4th person was a Lithuanian Air Force major who I am still connected to. We're friends, and he survived. The rescue efforts of which some of you guys were a part of or knew about, saw, experienced. It took about 11 minutes to get Roy, my contractor, out, 15 minutes to get me out, and then 90 minutes for Povlas. The way that helicopter was so mangled, they had to cut a hole in the back to get him out. They got Phyllis, my major, out. She was the last person. She was deceased. She was the last person removed from the wreckage at 98 minutes. They, of course, within 15 seconds of impact, people from all over that were around the area in the buildings or outside came running towards that helicopter. There are 2 Marines that have the Marine Medal for what they did that day. And, you know, I'm in the Air Force and we give out awards and decorations. The Marines are a little more discriminating about giving things out, I would say, over the course. And Christian could tell us a little more, being a Marine himself, having served as a Marine. But there are 2 Marines that have the Marine Medal, and that is the highest medal given for valor non-combat. And so true heroism. There is an Air Force civilian who was given the Air Force Civilian Award with the Valor device. And I think he's the only one still in the Air Force that has that. And so just the magnitude of the effort. And then there were some others that were recognized with some lesser awards that arguably I could make a case that they could get airmen's medals for some of the things that they did. And so people got me out. I did actually was coherent. I helped lift my hips and help them get me out. I've gotten to talk to some of those folks and gotten some of that feedback that fills in the story. And as I share this story, I heal through doing that, and I highlight resilience and connections. I continue to meet people like these 2 guys who are a part of the story. I have met people who have come up to me after a presentation and said, "I was this," or the dad of the Australian flight surgeon when I was flown back from NATO headquarters back to Kabul International to the clinic there. His daughter was the flight surgeon who worked on me. And I had literally no idea that she even existed until I presented my story and he told me about her. And then he connected us, and the profound healing and, I don't know, continuing our journey of the experience of that day, that he was able to connect us. I mean, we're friends. We have sent each other care packages across the world. And it's pretty profound to know a little bit more of what happened, because I didn't have that piece of the story until I was able to connect with her and learn more about it. So you guys are sharing more of the story that I don't know about. And it's profoundly healing. It's just part of that journey, that's a lifelong journey that I'm on, is that healing journey. I am connected to my major's family. Her oldest sister is my best friend. We met each other through the grief journey, and I dragged her into hockey at age 60. She's up in Chicago playing on a women's hockey team. Her sister Phyllis, we know, is like, you go, girl, because Phyllis was big into fitness. And she is an amazing individual that we all continue to celebrate, her and the other folks that we lost that day. And so that's kind of a thumbnail of what led up to everything. Let me know if you need me to amplify more, Chris, because I'm talking a lot.
Well, thank you for the story, and for everybody listening. I mean, let me just recap real quick. Helicopters flying in to UN headquarters. Mishap, helicopter goes down instantly. Half of the participants, or the passengers, are dead. The other half are in, as was said, in various states of disrepair. And these things, in these situations, there's nothing set. Like it could have been everybody was a fatality. A lot of things had to happen and come together. And as Buff just said, there's an accumulation of events. And that's what we're talking about, is that accumulation here. So I want to, before I go to Clayton, whose unit was on the ground and in the vicinity of this tragic accident, you had Eric Ward, who is an 18 Delta. So again, that's a Green Beret, but the Delta stands for a medic. So he's not unfamiliar with saving people. He's not unfamiliar with death. And it was some of those forces that made him create something. And Eric, I just want you to expand. Could you tell me, just, maybe 5 minutes, what did you create? What drove that creation? And then I'm going to go to Clayton and maybe how that was employed in a way that, benefited some folks. Eric?
Yeah. So, I mean, while I was in, my team was going on an op that we knew could be coming down the pipe. It was one of those ones kind of hanging out in the periphery that everyone hoped wouldn't come down. No one really wanted it. There's plenty of those, especially because, when it was initiated, it was the middle of the day, not a time we preferred to go out and work. In short, we got about 100 yards from the target, and we're coming up to a target that was well prepared for our arrival. Several folks were immediately and substantially injured by machine gun fire, and headed out to that on that op because it was daytime, and going in to certainly an uncertain situation. We carried as little equipment as possible, and unfortunately, especially for a medic, when you start to look at stripping out stuff and gear and weight, the medical stuff is sometimes some of the first stuff to go, to some, and one side of that, it's logical. On the other side, it's not. But we didn't bring any litters with us, so we had nothing to carry people on. And that ended up being, a mistake in hindsight, because we had a few people who weren't ambulatory. And ultimately we had to carry them, and it took, I believe, 3 hours to move about 1 kilometer to get them to where a helicopter could land, and evac. Go back, I don't know, 7 or 8 years from there, sparing you the detail, I spent an entire summer grounded, and was made to learn how to sew on a sewing machine. And because of that, I always brought sewing machines with me on deployments, and I would make stuff that we needed. And had a few days to recover after that incident, and just decided, hey, I didn't want to run into that specific scenario again, certainly for myself. So made, the first version of what later became the Phantom litter. Up until that point, a pole-less litter, which is just a sheet of material with handles on it, they were still made out of canvas. There weren't any that were made out of parachute material yet. There are plenty of versions of that now. But we didn't even bring those because it was still too large. So ended up creating, what became the Phantom litter. It's very small, weighs a few ounces, fits in the back of any tactical vest, and is widely used now. I went on to, when I left the military, a company bought that product design from me. I went to work for them for a few years and entered into a royalty agreement. And what I get to see, the benefit of continuing to receive royalties from that beyond the obvious is that I get to see that it's still out there being used and still having an impact. You lose touch with that initial ripple, and I'm really fortunate to kind of keep seeing where it's going, because I still have connectivity to it.
There's so many good things in there. Just a real quick recap on this. I mean, they may say that necessity is the mother of invention. I would say adversity is the father of innovation. And there was a need to innovate because shedding your. And by the way, if you haven't served in the military, the idea of give me more stuff to carry. Yeah, never. No military member ever said that. In fact, it goes in the other direction. And so you're constantly trying to economize. And when you got a lighter weight and even then a better and lighter weight solution, in this case for litter, you jump on that. And it takes, adversity. It takes great minds. The women and men of our armed forces that, come up with this stuff. And it's applicable not just in the military, but outside the military. By the way, what a great royalty, if you will, that's being paid right now. It's not in the form of cash. It's in the form of the four of us, particularly and specifically Buff being on the call, because that's the royalty of being able to do things that protect and save lives of our service members and our citizens. And with that in mind, I want to go to Clayton. Clayton, your unit was on the ground. Can you explain now how the things come together?
Yeah,
sure. This tragic accident and Eric's
Of course. I think to get there though, let's talk a little bit about what Eric had just said. He talked about the device that he created was out of necessity, but also as a means to strip weight. My unit in particular being a Pathfinder organization, I talked about us being a expeditionary unit. Expeditionary in the sense that we were a small unit. We were a 15 to 30 man element, not direct action, not intended to engage with the enemy, truly intended to get into a situation and get out of a situation without being detected. We valued less weight. We valued equipment, as Eric described, that does not require X number of people to be successful. So our team utilized that equipment. I remember sitting around that campfire that night, Christian, a number of years back, and I pulled up the picture and I showed Eric and I said, "Is this your device?" And sure enough, sitting on the back of my medics, attached their body armor, sure enough, is that device. So I fast forward a little bit to 2015. And in 2015, the Pathfinders, the unit which I was in charge of there, our primary deployment mission was downed aircraft and personnel recovery. My team was postured at Bagram Airfield, that's in Parwan province, about a 15-20 minute flight from Kabul. And at the time, we got the phone call. And I believe, Buff, I think it was October, I think is what you had mentioned. Forgive me, because I don't recall exact details here. But we got the phone call in our command post. And we got the phone call and said, "Fallen Angel." And Fallen Angel was our keyword, that there was a downed aircraft with personnel on board. And at the time, we didn't have specifics. So I ran to our higher headquarters command post, gathered the details. At the time, it was the discovery that, yes, as Buff described, that British Puma was coming into land at the soccer field. I believe it was a group of kids playing soccer on the soccer field, all things, and rightfully so. It's a soccer field. They were playing on the soccer field. That British Puma diverted off that landing zone, struck that PTIDS wire, and that's what caused the aircraft to go down. That was the information that we had at the time. Because as Buff described, they were within the confines of Kabul, of the NATO headquarters. We didn't have to deploy my entire team. They had a need for medics, as I think we all acknowledge with the criticality of Buff and the others on board. They needed medics. So the immediate need was, let's get your medics out there as quickly as possible. My guys, my hot team, and when I say hot, I had two different elements, a hot team and a cold team. Hot team responded within 15 minutes to any incident. Cold team would respond 30 minutes in a 30-minute timeline or 15 minutes after the fact. So I would take my hot team and respond to that incident. I took that medic who was on hot status. I said, you're going. 15 minutes after reception of that phone call saying, fallen angel, he was on that aircraft flying out to Buff's location, using Eric's device on his back to assist in that recovery. Now, it's interesting because I heard this story as you and I and Eric and now Buff is involved in this conversation. We've talked about this story time and time again. And about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, Buff and I connected for the very first time. I said, Buff, this is the story that I know as of today. And she says, you know, and she kind of scuffed a little bit, kind of laughed, said, you know, not exactly how I've, you know, heard of it. And maybe that's, you know, the alpha male mentality of, hey, here's what I did. Nobody else was there. Here's, you know, how it played out. And then we learned the bits and pieces after the fact. But I think the key takeaway is, you know, how neat of a story. Here we are, the four of us together, a device that Eric created, being utilized by team members of the individuals that I was deployed with to assist, you know, in Buff's recovery. It's just a phenomenal story, and I'm so proud to be a part of it. So glad that you got us together to talk about this. Appreciate you.
You know, it's an important story to tell too. I think it's, you know, of course, look, folks, there was 7,000 plus lives lost during the global war on terror, and I'm not exactly sure we're entirely done. I mean, when is done? And I mean, gets a vote, and maybe the body count is still going up, but last tally was over 7,000. And you know, we think about the ones we lost, and we don't often take enough time to think about the ones we saved. And this is really a story of being saved. I mean, in a very literal sense. Buff said something that was important. I want us all to kind of key in on, and that she said every time she tells this story, and every time the story gets filled in more, right, from other people that were there, it's how she heals and she continues to grow and develop, and she'll never be past this thing, but she carries the weight maybe a little differently every time it's amended, every time the story is filled out or she gets to talk about it. And so the reason why I say this is, so not only is this a story about you know, someone, and a number of someone's actually being saved in the past, to no small extent, and I'm not trying to be overly dramatic, I want to turn over to whoever wants to opine on this, it's about also saving some of our service members going forward. Let me be more specific. Every single person right now has lost a brother or sister, figuratively or literally, to military service. And for those that are here still today, the weight of being here while having lost others can be its own oppressive weight. And in the telling of these stories, there's a chance for us to focus on the healing that Buff is talking about, and maybe looking forward to a future that isn't maybe necessarily so guilt-ridden by us being the survivors, but rather more of a source of maybe pride, because this number here is greater by one because of the actions of others. So I want to turn it over to you folks, and either tell me I'm full of shit, or say that it, you know, maybe that there is some healing associated with the telling of these stories, and that there is value in it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, Christian, I'd say, I mean, first, I want to note this is the first time I've ever met Buff. You know, at all. I feel like if you had to, you know, weight the, you know, who played what role, I feel like I played a really small role in this whole thing. You know, it's nice to hear Buff mention, you know, how often she runs into people, you know, who were somehow involved, you know, in this, or their, you know, their child played some small part. You know, the story attached to why I got to play a very small part, you know, in Buff and Clayton's lives, you know, is a significant one. They're all kind of attached, you know, chained together. You know, for me, you know, I have a teammate, Andre, who We text throughout the year, but every year I know to expect a message from him on Veterans Day. He usually keeps it, concise. Anyone, who might listen, who knows Andre knows he's not, much for words. But every Veterans Day he says, Happy Veterans Day. I'm here because of you. It was, he was the person I was closest to, in that incident, and was the most severely injured, and, was lucky in many regards to make it out. But, it's because of him. Had that not happened, I never would have gotten to play my small part in what happened to Buff and what Clayton's team had to do. There's so I guess maybe there are no small parts, and there are just stories that aren't completely shared in all their detail. It's pretty cool to be a part of this one.
And it's so cool to see these stories come together, because I can't judge the significance of anyone's contribution into these stories, but I do believe they're all important. I couldn't possibly be the one to give sort of relative importance, but if some things hadn't happened, I mean, maybe the helicopter wouldn't have crashed in the first place, and maybe everybody would be dead. So I think that there's a lot of stuff that happened here, but it's fascinating to have these stories and see how often and how, again, like, they can connect. Folks, I don't think I've done a good job here of explaining how these stories coming together and these connections being made was such a lightning strike to happen in the middle of nowhere. And now, do we have the ability to do this more systematically as an opportunity for us to heal and connect more? That's another story, but the answer to that is absolutely, positively. And this, to me, is a case study of how it could happen, but at scale. Buff, Clayton, any thoughts as we wrap this up on how these stories are important to be shared or not, and whether they contribute to healing or maybe something else?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the aspect of healing. I've thought about this for quite some time now. I've been out of the Army now for about 5 years now, and as time passes, I think I've realized to myself that it's okay to share these stories. The stories that we've withheld, either we keep in the depths of our hearts, or we feel that we're not in their place to share just yet. That's okay. It's okay to take time and understand and interpret the stories that perhaps are going to aid in your healing, maybe not today, but maybe tomorrow. And for me, as time has passed, call it 5 years from now, I'll be in a better place to share another story that may help me heal just a little bit more, or may help somebody else heal. I think I've found, as time passes and stories are told, it helps in my healing just a little bit more.
Thank you, Clayton. And I know, given that you, like so many others here, lost a number of people that were part of the units you were attached to, or even commanded. It's losses. You just don't go and say, "Oh, I lost a person," and just kind of move on that easy. It's a weight that we carry with us, forevermore. Buff, anything to close this out before I kind of wrap this discussion?
Yeah, I just want to say, seeing you guys and where you fit into this story highlights the fact that, we have something happens and there's an immediate group of people we think about that it affects, but we don't think about how many other people are touched and affected by something like this helicopter crash. And I've met people, like I said, sharing the story. There are people who were at the NATO headquarters and saw the helicopter hit the ground. Didn't know any of us, didn't have the role in playing rescue, but were deeply affected. Our guys at our chow hall, that Phyllis she's taught German at the academy, and she would make the effort to talk to our third country nationals in their language, their own home language, just to talk to them. Her loss profoundly affected them. Some of them I'm friends with on Facebook, and that we need to understand that there are a lot of people that are affected by one thing. We tend to think about, there's the immediate families, the units, that kind of thing. But there are so many people that are bonded by our service together, and being in that place at that time, that are affected by that. And so that's some food for thought as I've walked this journey of the last 7 years. An example is the crash in Dallas that happened this weekend, the B-17 and the P-63 that collided, and there were six folks that were killed in that crash. And that has affected a wide range of people. There's the people that were there. There's the people that know those people. There are people that know people that fly commemorative Air Force aircraft that might not have been the person that they know, but that crash has shaken them. And that we need each other to walk our way through where we fit into that story in our grief, wherever it fits into the story. And that you're going to have that's just an awareness that there's more than just that immediate group we tend to think about to rally around as time unfolds. There's that. And then this is not something that any of us are going to get over, whatever our role is. And Eric, I tell you, you play as much a role as anyone else. There's no small part to a human experience that we've all had. Your human experience led to what you did, that led to where we all are literally sitting here today. And that we're not necessarily going to get over this. You know, Christian, I don't think you've ever gotten over losing your brother. You carry it, and your family created the scholarship that connects all of us literally today. If it weren't for that generosity and compassion that your family started with way back years ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. All the things may have happened, but we wouldn't have necessarily those connections. And you guys did that as a way to heal. But what you also did is a way to grow and keep your brother's memory alive. And that's what we're kind of doing here, is as we tell those stories, we're keeping those folks we all have lost, maybe not in particular alive, and their honor, their service is what we all are literally doing today. And that's why I tell people when I tell the story, you represent Phyllis and Greg and the others we lost that day, and all the other 7,000 that we lost in service in the global war on terror. Is what we're doing today carries them forward, and they live on because of what we're doing. And I think just realizing that really kind of helps us carry those heavier parts of our parts to the story and its impact on us.
Buff, you know, I know you said you get an opportunity to share the story. I think, you know, where the whole story started for me, and this is a continuation of it, you know, is a friend of mine when I was 15, you know, Gino, he had this idea that we should fill all the bells at the school with expanding foam. Had Gino not, you know, been a friend of mine and had not proposed that we fill all the bells with foam so they couldn't ring, I wouldn't have spent the summer grounded and wouldn't have learned to sew and wouldn't have went on to do all of these things. So, you know, maybe the next time you share it, you know, you can start with a story about, you know, two 15-year-old kids and a few cans of great stuff foam, for that, because that's as far back as the story goes for me. You know, if I had to tell it, it would start there. You know, this being a continuation of it, you know, this is something, it's surreal almost to be here thinking about where it started. So.
Well, folks, I mean, it is surreal. And for all of our listeners here, you know, these stories, they come together. You know, it's, whether it's filling a bell with foam, or it's, you know, somebody that had, you know, previously been in Iraq, and was, you know, as Buff described, you know, already sort of an accumulation of events, even before the events continued to accumulate. I mean, these stories continue to unfold and need to be told for a number of different reasons. And I'll go into that as I wrap here. But I'll just say, if you think that this is just like a one-off, I get it. I would have thought the same thing. Like, it was such a weird thing for this thing to happen. But I want to share with you real quick, it's not the only time. Those Eric and I were doing the Task Force Tribute tour, covering 1 mile for every service member lost, and we happened to be in Boise, Idaho, and he was there was a story going on about a Kiowa pilot that was shot while covering for the troops on the ground. And the story was that as it was being told, Eric was telling it, they were listening to the pilot who eventually bled out and died from being shot because they were so close to the ground. That's what Kiowa pilots do. And then one other person in that circle, as we were, and Eric was relaying the story, actually was there listening to the radio net too, and listened to this tragedy unfold. And then there was quite a story that went as they connected those dots. But that's for us to tell at a later day. But just suffice it to say, folks, that the reason why we do what we do at Project RELO and Task Force Tribute is because we believe there's a fundamental thing that is associated, a number of things that are associated with these stories. One, it's important for us to remember. In remembering, that's how we're honoring. That's what Buff was talking about. We are honoring those that served and those that went before us, but it's also selfish. And then in the telling and the retelling of these stories, we benefit in the terms of we cope better. We heal just a little bit. And for all of you that care about our service members living and past, I ask you to consider that we should be doing whatever we can to get these stories recorded and to get those that are still with us to share what they're willing to share. They often won't. Sometimes they need some help. So sign on, tell your story, get others to tell their story. See us again. Visit us another show. Go to projectrelo.org, go to taskforcetribute.org, learn more about how we can capture your stories and maybe do some of what we just did here. Folks, it is an honor and a privilege to know each and every one of you. And it's an absolute honor and a great feeling on my side to see you all together right here, right now, and connecting these dots. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. To my friends, colleagues, and family members on the line here, thank you for everything that you've done and everything you will do. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.